Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. This time we'll be taking a look at Eremiya, Pirate Sprite Darros, as well as Jorge. Well, I have to say one thing. I forgot to cover Eremiya. I thought I had already covered her, in fact, on my channel. I guess it's mostly purely because of the fact that she is so underwhelming. I've been complaining about her very terrible treatment that IS gave her, which... For those who don't understand, Eremiya is a very major antagonist. The reason Legion exists at all, or Clarice, or Katarina, the reason why they exist the way they do, is purely because of this woman. She is very important to the story, and in fact, you can genuinely say she's more important than Iago is to Fates, yet Iago gets a pref and she doesn't. Wahoo. So yeah, I guess because I complained a good bit about her, I thought I already covered her, but that is not the case. Still, isn't it just great that after the fact that I was already salty over this, they decided to be like, oh yes, remember Brave Veronica, the very character that is the reason why people are like screaming at the top of their lung that they want actual refines and prefs for like Gen 1 staff units because they have nothing to their name. They are all very similar to one another because they don't have pref. Yeah, she's getting a refine. Great. It just reinforced to me the notion that if you want to have a pref staff, you need to be from Fire Emblem heroes like Bridal Fjorm, Loki, as well as Brave Veronica, or win a Choose Your Legend, like Camilla and again Veronica. I don't get it, man. It's just really asinine to me, but whatever. Also, before I start, I should also point out the fact, Choose Your Legend. I did not plan on making a video on them, but I might. This is not because, well, it's a bit because I feel forced to it, but at the same time it's just because I feel like I might as well do this. I've seen a lot of very poor claims, to say the least. Claims such as the fact that Dimitri is the best on that banner, when it's the complete opposite. As much as I like Dimitri, he is not that great. Or the fact that I hear people say Lysithea is like one of the worst of the banner when she is in fact the best. One of the absolute best nuke with a kit that is utterly disgusting and very difficult to deal with is considered underwhelming. In what world? Like, genuinely, there is no reason to use base Lysithea over Brave Lysithea. That's how good she is. But that's going to be something I'm going to have to cover in depth on a Choose Your Legend analysis. Now, keep in mind, I just want to point this out before someone goes, it's so late! Okay, yeah, it most likely will be late, okay, because I did not expect to have to cover this. I've just seen so many just wrong take when it comes down to this banner that I just decided I should in fact cover it. So yeah, it's going to most likely be late because I'm going back to school on the 25th. That means I have 3 days to work on this banner, and then I'm back to, well, doing electromechanics and having to deal with wearing a goddamn mask in class where it's already hot to begin with. Most likely also doing stuff like welding with it. Joy. Anyway, that aside, just don't expect it to be soon, like tomorrow or the day after. Most likely won't. I will not push myself mentally and physically to work on this, especially when we are so soon to go back in class. I do not want to be in anything but top shape when I go back in class. I do hope people can understand this very simple fact. But yeah, I'll do my best to get it out as soon as possible, especially since I still have the legendary tier list update to do. I'm basically just squeezing that between two big videos. This one is actually a big one. I'm actually because I'm also covering Ivy's change, so it's a bit different than usual. That said, I'm not covering everything with Ivy's change. I'm mostly covering the characters that will get a lot of help out of it. And to those, there's like 6 that got a placement change. There's obviously Legion that also got a placement change, and then there's those 3 heroes. So yeah, it's going to be a bit big. So yeah, let's get started on the actual analysis now. 5 minutes in. So first off is Darros. As per usual, I'm going to go from worst to best, and yes, somehow Darros is kind of worse than Eremiya. Eremiya actually has the best offense from the free-to-play pool because of IVs. And that said, it's not by much. Darros is just completely outclassed is the thing, but yes. While the rest of the kit outside of the weapon is absolutely irrelevant when it comes down to Darros, what is actually important is very much Deck Swabber. This is a very good weapon alongside with the Flowing Lance, which especially now, and you'll see that later in the video, not exactly Deck Swabber but mostly Flowing Lance. Those 2 weapons are so good that it actually, in tandem with other skills that got released in this very month, got certain units to just jump up by like... There was one unit that went from like, I believe, A tier to S-, purely because of combos like Flowing Lance into 2 other skills, actually 3 other skills, but you'll see once we get there. But yeah, overall it's a fantastic weapon. It's basically a way for flyers to have access to a lull, as it's basically low attack def as long as you're solo. Keep in mind though, flyers are very good for their mobility, so you're not going to be able to use their mobility. That said, it is still a lull, and flyers can still work relatively well without having movement skills, especially nowadays because we're getting to have more option for B skill. Pegasus Flight, for example, Mystic Boost is still an option, obviously. Dive Bomb, I guess, but Dive Bomb is very situational. It's mostly Xerxes, Cordelia, and so on and so forth that can really abuse that. But yeah, overall, having a lull in a weapon is just really huge. Flowing Lance is an even bigger one, but you'll see once we get to the tier list update itself. Overall, just doing -5 attack, -5 def is basically giving you 5 attack, 5 def, 5 res. And comboing this, obviously, into a lull is just insane. Again, more info on that later. As far as comparisons are concerned, I don't think I have to really explain this one. At the end of the day, Ross do very similarly, and if you then compare Darros in particular to Echidna, you basically get 1 less HP, but 1 more attack, 1 more def, and 2 more res for the cost of like 3 HP. Darros only has 3 def and 1 HP, and he loses on 1 attack, 1 speed, and 2 res. Just use Echidna. There's just no reason to use Darros over Echidna. And if you have a Ross, he does very similarly as well. So again, those 2, which cost you 2,700 less grails, will just outperform. That's just kind of how it is. And that's all I have to say about Darros, because there's no point in me talking about a unit that's fairly obsolete in terms of builds. Next up is Eremiya, obviously, like I said. Kit is all pretty pointless, it's all filler. Don't think I have to explain much about that one. It's just typical healers without a pref fare, which isn't that great. I'm so glad that she did not get a pref when Veronica's getting a refine. Anyway, it's honestly disappointing because, again, Eremiya is a very major antagonist. She's very built up as this like very strong character, yet every people in her orphanage that she basically abused into becoming what they are, they all got pref. She didn't. Even Garnev got a pref. She's the only one that doesn't have a pref in all of them. So I guess she might get a pref in like 2025. It's so stupid. It's so stupid. Anyway, moving on to comparison, and this is what I meant. It's not enough to actually make her like amazing, but she does have the best offense overall. No question about it. Eremiya, Amarin, I don't know why I'm struggling to remember the two and distinguish the two, but Amarin is slightly worse in terms of offense, but she also has enough to have a rest stat for certain ploys, for certain support. So it's really up to you which one you take. As for builds, as much as I could showcase some, I do feel you can just watch the video with Amarin. Every build that Emblem can do, Eremiya can also do. It's just that Eremiya is a lot more pricey and therefore not exactly worth it, because it is 1750 grails at the end of the day. Most people are not going to be willing to spend that much on a unit, unless it's, you know, something like Jorge, or something like Jamkey, or something like Gangrel, and so on and so forth. So, you know, that's just kind of what it is. And so as a result, I'm not going to be showcasing build. Just know that if you really want to know build's opinion when it comes down to it, I have a video on Amarin, and the build on there just works just as fine as on Eremiya, unless they're reliant on ploys, which I don't think they are, because that was back when we had 5 Dragon Flowers, and I don't use Dragon Flowers for builds, except if I'm really doing comparison. So obviously, ploys at 34 res is not exactly that great. Moving on to Jorge, who's the actual big boy of the bunch. The character that was butted into existence, most likely, because Jorge basically had no votes every other years, and because IS has literally no bot prevention. In fact, for those who don't know, you used to have to log in with your Nintendo account to vote before the 3rd year, I believe, of Choose Your Legend. And then on the 3rd year, and that's why we had such a huge spike. Like, this is why on the 2nd year we had like way less votes than in the 1st year, and then on the third year, all had like twice the votes of last year. That's purely because you had to log in on a Nintendo account on the 2nd year, and you did not have to on the 3rd year, which basically meant what you could do is basically open an incognito window, go on the website, vote for the character, and you could just close that and then reopen it, and just do that repeatedly for as many votes as you can. And yeah, I think Jorge was basically butted into existence as a result. So glad about that. I just love how he's the representation of botting is cool. Jesus Christ, I hate this. Anyway, yeah, so essentially this is the rest of the kit. Trash it. Nobody cares. When it comes down to the weapon, though, the weapon is insane. Essentially, it's Joint Drive Attack 2, I guess, because you basically give 5 attack to everyone around you. Or I guess I should just say it's Drive Attack 4? Because it does not affect himself. Which is very solid. It basically means that he has support utility, and there's no restriction whatsoever on this. However, here's something that actually affects him as well as allies. He also inflicts -5 attack. This essentially means that he has 5 more def and res at all time, because there's no way to turn that off, basically. And on top of that, accelerate special trigger, cooldown count -1. Boy, oh boy, this is what makes the weapon work. So yeah, this is a very good weapon. It basically is cooldown -1, 5 def, 5 res, and buffs everyone around you by 5 attack. No questions asked. It is an insanely good bow, to the point that it's very comparable to, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this, Legendary Crom's Pref. In fact, when it comes down to comparison, you want to know how many blue infantry bows we have? We have Legendary Lucina, Legendary Crom, and Jorge. And this is why I said that making a blue infantry bow would not be a bad idea for like literally any new banner. Legendary heroes are very hard to pull. which means when you go from legendary heroes, which is on average 1 copy for 200 orb, to free, yeah, a bit of a jump, isn't it? And now moving on to the comparison. Obviously, as a result, the only comparison I can really use is Chrom. There's no colorless that is nearly as bulky as George. Chrom is actually less bulky than George, as a matter of fact. Their stat line are very similar. Keep in mind that legendary Chrom's weapon is a 17 might weapon. So essentially, if you're comparing stats without prefs, it would be 62 attack instead of 65. But for the fact that you don't have attack plus 30, you have cooldown -1, which is a lot better. Now, legendary Chrom is a lot stronger in Arena. Keep that in mind, because in Arena, having a pref that's effective against armors, while armors are not nearly as common anymore, is still fairly solid. You can actually one-shot Winter Sophist as a result fairly consistently, depending on your set, of course. If you go with close counter, which you shouldn't, but let's say you are, you might actually run into problems. But if you don't have something like this, if you actually have a set more dedicated on doing damage, very likely to kill, because if you use this weapon plus low attack def on top of, say, def blow 4, you're basically looking at, if you use to change fate to basically boost your attack, 79 attack plus 9 debuff in defense. So let's say you're dealing with Winter Sophist and she has 45 def, which is more than she should have. Your 79 will go down obviously to 64, and then just jump all the way back up to 96, and then to 105 because the enemy will lose 9 defense. So you'll do 60 damage, one-shotting Winter Sophist. Welcome to hell. This is why nobody likes Legendary Chrom, because he is insanely annoying to deal with. As most free-to-play players, or people that have not spent that much on this game, will be mostly reliant on armored units to score. And if they are reliant on armored units to score, this dude will absolutely destroy them. No questions asked. And he is extremely annoying to deal with as a result, especially with an impact set, because his speed is actually not trash, which is why Speed Plus is the ideal boon to go with, as obviously he has a super boon in speed, as you can see here with his 36 speed. He is frustrating as all hell to deal with, and if you don't believe me, you have just not been in the 750 plus pools. That's all I'm going to say, because my god, I still despise dealing with him, as the only true counter that is 100 efficient with Chrom is Rinka. That's the only unit you can genuinely just be like, yep, I win with. Every other ones it's like, okay, I have to double check, does he have enough speed? Does he have too much speed? Does that mean I need to just dump this unit? Okay, all life and death set, I guess I have to use Sylvain. Oh, close counter set. Oh, this is a close counter set with Speed Plus and Darting Blow, I guess I need to use Selena. Like, it's just so fucking annoying how you need to have several units to deal with several variation of this unit. It's just really annoying. And Life and Death set is rare, it's about 10% of the encounters, but it will trip you over if you have no counter to it. Sturdy Impact, Mirror Impact are rare, they're still 20% of the encounter you're going to come across. They are still a pain in the ass. That's just kind of how it is. Chrom is just a royal pain in the ass. Now, what if I were to tell you that, right? And then tell you that George is very similar to Chrom? Because he is. So the -6 attack that his bow does, which by the way, unlike Chrom, George's debuff in attack actually helps your allies if you're dealing with melee units. If you're dealing with range units, George's debuff means nothing, okay? Because range units will just go out of his range. But if you're dealing with melee units, the -5 attack is very much a thing that could be a thing. Cooldown -1 also gives him an edge over Chrom when it comes down to survivability, or a certain set in particular, as you'll see with the build section. But essentially, George hits 45 def, 39 res, right? Chrom hits 46 def, 1 more def, 37 res. Yeah, so he's behind by 2 res, but over 1 def. They are very similar in bulk, and Chrome's bulk is one of the most annoying aspects about him. He is very annoying to take down. Impacts are going to screw you over. That's just kind of how it is. Another thing to keep in mind is the fact that his speed is also frustrating, and George also has roughly the same amount of speed. So yeah, that's very solid overall. The only thing is that obviously Chrome has more attack. His weapon does -6 def for him as well. So that means you are literally sitting at 71 attack from the get-go. George is at 55. But don't let that dissuade you from him being a good unit, because my god can he do a lot. The fact that I'm even using a GHB unit to compare into a legendary hero, not to mention the most controversial legendary hero, and not to mention the most frustrating legendary hero to deal with, boy, oh boy, that should give you a bit of a hint that the unit is good. Obviously, Legendary Chrome is considered better, mostly because the way he is very annoying in Arena. That's just kind of how it is. In the end of the player, he's not as good, but to change fate is just so good, because it's a 500 SP assist, which makes no sense. It should have been 400, but it's 500, I guess. Why is that a thing? I guess it just is. But yeah, it basically allows you to repo a unit out of danger and also then move Chrome out of the way, which is huge. But if it wasn't for that, I would say George and Chrome are extremely similar overall. But yeah, let's move on to builds now so you have a bit of an idea. Keep in mind, I'm not going to use any Sturdy Impact / Mirror Impact set. The main reason why that's not a thing for this, even though you can very much use this, is because we don't have a good combo for solos yet. For example, if we had Speed Def solo, I would say Mirror Impact would be a fantastic choice, because then you would be able to hit 51 def, 49 res, as well as having a good speed stat. But that's not the case, so I decided to not include this. But keep that in mind, what I just said, very much worth mentioning. It is insanely good on George, when it's going to become a thing. So, talking about builds, obviously I'm going to start with the close counter ones. Again, Coast Foil's not really a good option because of dragons. I don't think I have to explain that. But yeah, here we have the reason why Speed Res Solo is insane as usual. With Twin Drive Speed and Speed Res Solo, you effectively get basically an armored unit that has 2 movement. Speed Res Solo pushes your Def and Res to 45-45, and then Daniel Maid's Bow, which, what a stupid ass name, his bow, pushes his bow to 50 Def, 50 Res. Yes, you heard that right. That much bulk. What about his speed? 50 speed. What about his attack? 60 attack. Yeah. And with Special Spiral, you can basically make so that every time you get hit, you proc Aether. For free. So what ends up happening is you will struggle to find a way to die. As long as you're in Special Spiral range, that is. Actually, I will say AoEs are still dangerous. Obviously, I don't think I have to mention this. But just in case people don't realize Ophelia is still very much a threat in this day and age, yes, that's very much a thing that can happen. As for the set on the right, it's very similar, except this time you're using pure damage. You are basically hitting 45 def, so Bonfire does 22 damage. That's really solid, right? What about your bulk here? Well, you're looking at 53 def and 53 res. Yeah. 53 def, 53 res with 50 speed and 63 attack. And when you proc Bonfire, that's an extra 22 damage. Which, if you have Brave Lucina, means you get hit, you proc. Every single time. That's pretty huge. Unless you have to deal with something like Special Fighter, of course, so Winter Sophist is out of the question. Other than that, I mean, you're in a very good position. You can definitely destroy most things with this. It is kind of disgusting. Don't think I have to explain this more. It's very self-explanatory. I've shown so many sets with something similar to this. The fact that he can use this, on top of having something as broken as -5 attack, I think you can kind of add 1+1 together. Next up is the second page of builds, which is a life and death set. Obviously going to start with the right one. Cooldown -1 means AoEs are very much an option, and as you can see, he can absolutely decimate with them, as he's going to be sitting at 70 attack on the AoE itself, 74 attack in combat. Which, at this point, if you struggle to kill with this, I don't know what the hell you're fighting, but it's not meant to be something to take down. At that point, even something like Winter Sophist is utterly dead, because the AoE itself will get Winter Sophist down to like 1 HP. And then our weapon will just not proc, so doing the last, you know, 1 damage should not be difficult. With Special Spiral, you will just loop into doing AoEs again. The main problem is getting into AoE range, but that's really it. Absolutely insane. Speed Rest Solo also ensure that you still have bulk, while also having a bit of speed. You're basically looking at 74 attack and 50 speed in combat. As far as your def and res is concerned, you're looking at 45 def and 45 res. With life and death, what? It's just so stupid to me, but I mean, that's just kind of what Jorge is. And on the left is something similar, but this time instead of using AoE, is basically just using pure bulk. You still have 48 def and 48 res with this because of low attack def in his bow. And you still have a 74 attack and 46 speed, 50 speed with this, which means 74 attack basically transforms into 22 damage. Draconic Aura does 22 damage, so it's better than Bonfire, which does 20. So yeah, insanely good. Basically it means you get hit proc, because he has a 2 cooldown due to his cooldown -1 on his bow. Again, like I said before, Mirror Impact, once Speed Def Solo becomes a thing, is going to be an absolutely amazing set for him, because he's also going to be just able to still hit 50 speed very easily, which also will be very hard to deal with. There's not much you can do with it. It's just that right now, impact sets are very awkward to work with for him, because if you use 30 impact, you are left with 16 res to spare, or 6 if you have Speed Res Solo. Then if you take Mirror Impact, you don't really have one that, like any seal that give you death very easily, so you're still in a weird position as a result. Just keep in mind also, I've not mentioned this during the entire time, but keep in mind, his bow is still a buffing tool, so comboed into Joint Drive Attack, he literally gives 9 attack to whatever unit is within 2 space. That's a lot, okay? So yeah, it does a lot for him. It is a very solid bow. It basically is very similar to what Winter Jafar can do, but blue. And 2 movement. And not stuck with getting Armored Stride, or more importantly, being stuck with someone for Armor March. Very, very, very solid unit. So now let's talk about the tierness itself. Before I touch the ones that has changed, Darros is A-, which is lower than the Eremiya because, again, Echidna exists, Ross exists, kind of makes building him up pointless. Eremiya is very similar. I do think overall Emrin is just so much cheaper, it's better, but I will still acknowledge the fact that she is overall better than Emrin in a lot of situations by a very, very, very small margin. And then you have Jorge in S+, because it's Jorge, and he has a ton of bulk, very able to make his speed work, a ton of attack to work with. Well, not really a ton of attack, but still 60-63 attack is very workable when you proc special constantly. So obviously he's very solid. I will say he is overall a bit inferior to some of the units here. Like for example, I do think Minerva, especially now, is better. Gangrel is better as well. Eliwood is overall better, especially now that he has access to IVs. It does so much for him. Brunia is also fairly solid. I'd say actually he's more like at the bottom, more or less, but he's still extremely solid. Now talking about the units that move. Julius moved up one tier because Speed Plus is a super boon for him, and it actually helps him go from 27 speed to 31, which actually makes so that he can be used in a very similar way to Iago. Still, Iago as well as Lorenz are overall better because the only thing that makes Julius Julius is the fact that he has a pref, and his pref is utter garbage. It literally makes him a dragon with no benefit whatsoever in being a dragon, and dragon killers are absolutely everywhere. I don't see the point of this weapon. It's just absolute trash, and I hope he gets a refine at one point. Now for groups of people, because that's going to be a bit easier, I'm going to start with Lens Flyers. So here's Lens Flyers and what happened to them this month. They got a new weapon, they got a new C skill, they got a new seal. All of this is so useful. Okay, so let me just put it this way, right? Phantom Res, I have not done the Secret Seal tier list update yet, but I'm pretty sure you can kind of understand how it works. If you are comparing res to someone else, you get plus 10 res during the comparison. The reason why it works here as well as it does is because you compare res on the second part of Pegasus Flight. So as long as the enemy has 54 or less speed for Cormac, let's just take Cormac for example, okay? 54 or less speed. Then we get to the second part where you compare res, right? Let's say you're dealing with someone that has 35 res, without Pegasus Res, Phantom Res, you'd be basically getting them to lose 2 attack, 2 death. Great. With Phantom Res, your 39 res is now 49 res, which means that the 35 res dude basically loses 7 attack and death. Which effectively means, when comboed into, you know, everything else, that's a lot. With Flowing Lance, it essentially means that you get 12 attack, 12 death, 12 res. Okay? And then you have Attack Speed Rain, which also fixes his speed to some extent, which means you're going to be at 51 speed. And they also lose 4 more attack. So basically, with Pegasus Flight, Flowing Lance, and Attack Speed Rain, you're doing minus 16 attack if the enemy has 35 or less res and 54 or less speed. Yes, it is as broken as it sounds. You effectively just make your bulk, as long as they have 35 or less res, 62 defense and 55 res. I don't think I have to explain why that's good. And all of these characters can use it. Fia also, but let me just put it this way. Phantom Res is what makes Eve and Cormac work. When it comes down to Sigrun and Fia, right now they have to rely on Brazen Attack Death, which is a very requested seal. Sigrun is overall better than Fia. I mean, if you compare the stats, it's literally like... Sigrun is literally just a better version of Fia. 1 more attack, 1 more speed, 3 more res. The res is actually fairly useful because you do not have Phantom Res here. So it can make the difference for like 1 or 2 points of attack and death being reduced from the enemy. That's kind of important. And also, I'll also just point this out. 1 less attack, 1 less speed, obviously. Sigrun is just overall more consistent. That's purely because Fia was a Gen 3 unit, and because IS is stupid, and they decided to make Gen 4 be able to get 10 flowers, instead of it being Gen 3 and less. You know, as it should have been, because then Gen 4 unit would not be on the same level as a Gen 5 if you have 10 flowers on them. Just pointing the obvious, by the way. But yeah, it's just really stupid. But yeah, at the end of the day, Fia is still a decent option. Sigrun is probably one of the weaker one in S-, because when it comes down to defense, Fia and Sigrun are both much worse than Cormac and Eve. And even though the res are lower, because of Phantom Res, they're basically tied, or in Eve's case, even better during the comparison check. So yeah, it's very solid. And another thing to note, Sigrun and Fia, they're going to become a lot better the second attack def solo becomes a thing, for obvious reason. You need to be solo for flowing lance to begin with anyway, right? So obviously at that point, once that becomes a thing, I mean, it's good. You can just be, you're going to be able to just have attack def solo, combo that into the weapon, and not actually have to be under 80% HP to actually make this work, which is very useful. Keep in mind also, once attack def solo comes out, I do think Sigrun will be outclassing Eve and Cormag, because while they do have more attack than Sigrun right now, attack def solo means 6 more attack and defense. They have to use their seal slot to make Phantom Res work. So, you know, or Pegasus Flight work through Phantom Res. So, obviously Sigrun will have overall more stats. Still, I do think they're all more or less equal right now. And even if attack def solo becomes a thing, I'll say like Sigrun will be at the top of S-, whereas Eve and Cormac will be at the bottom of S-. Keep also in mind that Fia is very comparable to some extent, but the 6 defense that Eve has over her and the 3 def that Cormac has over Fia kind of makes up for it. And even with attack def solo, she's not that far off from Cormac and from Eve, so there's that. Keep also in mind that Eve and Cormac outscores Fia. Another reason why unlike Eremiya, who is technically better, here it's just so much more cleaner how much better they are than Fia. But Fia can still make this work. The thing is, we have not really gotten any Lance Flyer in Gen 4, outside of like maybe 5-star exclusives like Tsubasa, for example. That's really the main one I can think of, because that's the main one that's decent. But yeah, not much else to say here. Overall, they got a lot. They basically got a huge buff. That's basically what it turns into. Keep in mind, everything but Pegasus Flight came this month. That's how much of a buff this was. So yeah, don't think I have more to say here. Let's move on to Axe Flyers. Now, you might be wondering, why did Axe Flyers not move? It's purely because there's no point in moving them. So, Axe Flyers. Main one is obviously Narshan. A lot of people will probably tell me, oh, but that's also a buff for him. Not really. Because, look at this, right? If you don't take Speed Plus, okay, your speed is not good enough. You're going to have like 48 speed, and like I said in a previous video, 50 speed is more like what you want. So, yeah, you're going to have, without Speed Plus, 49 speed total. That's not enough. So obviously you want to have Speed Plus as a result. Or Speed Refine for the second one, with Speed Plus. In which case, yeah, okay, that's a thing, alright. Keep in mind that Rune Axe, in my opinion, is worse than Dex Swabber. The main reason is because, yes, you get some regen from Rune Axe, but unlike like Fallen Celica, who gets 8 across the board, you only get 4. And you already start with less BST to begin with, so it's kind of awkward. And if you use the very same set here than you do on TSA Minerva, TSA Minerva ends up with very similar defense and res. I do think with Dex Swabber, it's a bit less difficult to say, but that at the same time, she also can use Dex Swabber as seen here. If you want to abuse Pegasus Flight on TSA Minerva, you absolutely have to go Res Plus and also have a Res Refine of any kind of weapon. Because otherwise you just don't have enough res to really make it work as well as you can. Here with Pegasus Flight, you essentially hit, 48 res. With Dex Swabber, if you have Pegasus Flight active, Dex Swabber, and attack speed rain, you're basically again getting 16 attack less on your enemy, which means as a result you're going to be looking at 63 defense and 54 res. And while that is true, and while, yes, Narshan can do something similar, you kind of just end up with basically the same bulk, but slightly worse, less speed, and more importantly, less attack. So yeah, still no point in building him that way over Minerva, and it just further cements why Minerva is in this tier. Though keep in mind, while I do say that, you know, this is definitely solid on TSA Minerva. I will say that base Minerva, if you have the Resplendent, uses this better. It's not even like a comparison worth making. She is absolutely better than TSA Minerva at this type of set. So yeah, just keep that in mind, because the way her own weapon works is if you want to focus on bulk with Pegasus Flight, you can do that with base Minerva, and then your damage, which, to be fair, Pegasus Flight and Dex Swabber are good, and base Minerva can also use that, and everything attached to this. Yes, you hit 74 attack here, and yes, base Minerva can get to a decent chunk of attack as well, but the thing that makes Minerva better is that she also has access to Eau Claire. Now, Eau Claire doesn't sound that great until you actually already have good bulk. If you already have good bulk, you can have cooldown -1, and on top of this, 10 damage on spec, which means Ruptured Sky is a phenomenal action that you can use. Basically, get hit, proc, and then you just absolutely decimate what you're dealing with. It's 23 damage, basically. It's basically Bonfire for free. If you have, on top of this, Brave Lucina, you can use Bonfire instead. And then, you're basically looking at like 20-30 damage, plus the 10 damage from the Wodawa effect. It's ridiculous. You basically absolutely destroy them, and you do not take much damage at all, either. So, yeah, it basically means Minerva has more option than TSA Minerva. Because TSA Minerva's axe is good, yes, but it does not work nearly as well, because you need a Res Refine for Pegasus Flight to be consistent. Base Minerva does not need that, and she has access to a, you know, a burst damage weapon that gives her a lot of option. So yeah, there's just that. But yeah, otherwise TSA Minerva does have a new option now. So there you go. And the last one are also the Axe Armored unit. I'm gonna cover Legion after, don't worry. The Axe Armored units, which are Dorcas as well as Flame Emperor. As you've probably heard back in my review when it came down to these characters, I pointed out that the main issue that they ran into was speed. This is kind of fixed because both of them are at 25 speed, which means with a speed boon, you are going from 25 to 29. And that kind of fixes a lot of issues. That's why I said, like, IVs do not matter all that much. They really don't change that much placements at the end of the day. If anything, it makes certain units not as pointless because there's no comparison that outright destroys you anymore. Because they just beat you in every stat because they have access to IVs. So, I mean, it's helpful on that front, but typically if a unit's good, IVs are not going to change that. Like, Gangrel is amazing. The fact that you can go for Def Plus or Res Plus just cements the fact that he's good. But that won't make me go like, oh, I need an S++ tier for that character now. No, absolutely not. Or, like, oh, Gemkey can now hit 70 attack. Mine is going to hit 70 attack anyway, the second that I can change his IV to attack plus. Great. Does that mean that he should be an S+ tier now? 70 attack with a Brave Bow? No, not really. I mean, he's gonna function exactly the same as he did before. It's when you get an IV that allows you to change your set completely, like TSA Minerva. She can now be a Pegasus Flight user. But she's already amazing to begin with, so I don't know where I would put her now. Like, she's already S+. What do you want me to say? But yeah, the armored ones. Here's what you can do with the armored boys now. And girls, I guess. Essentially here, you get to see why Speed Plus does so much. you would be stuck at 46 speed. In fact, before then, the best option you had were bonds, and bonds are not exactly that amazing for armored units. They work, but in a lot of cases, because you have a unit next to you, what ends up happening is that the unit back, like next to you, gets fucking sniped, which is not exactly a good thing. So this is a good way to basically mitigate this, because now you're solo. And obviously, like, none of these sets that I'm showing here are actual full sets. I'm just basically giving you, like, an idea of where I would go with. The special is completely up to you. You can do whatever you want. The idea here, though, is really... Also, slaying, special fighter, Aether, very much a thing. Keep that in mind. Anyway, that said, essentially, now, because you don't have a bond, you have access to speed plus, you have access to 5 more flowers. That's 6 more points of speed. He was stuck at 44 before. They were stuck at 44 before. Now they jump to 50. A bit of an increase, eh? 50 speed is actually very solid and quite workable. When it comes down to Flame Emperor, you now have 49 def as well as 44 res. With Dex Swabber, that's 54 def and 49 res. I don't think I have to explain why that's good. 71 attack. Dorcas is very similar, except that he has less stats overall because he's basically Gen 2, whereas Flame Emperor is Gen 4. So yeah, they're basically the same unit for the most part, honestly. It's just that there's a difference of 5 res that's actually noticeable. The rest is basically very much the same. But yeah. All that to say, yeah, this is a huge buff for them, and that's why they're going to be in the spot they are. I still think Eliwood is overall better than either of these two, purely because his speed is a lot more workable. You have access to ploy, you have access to a lot of options that, while they could also work with, Eliwood does not need to actively go out of his way for it. Like, you can go for Flowing Lance and just not even care about speed plus, especially now that you can change IVs. 38-35 is an insanely powerful stat line to work with. With you know, flowers, that's 40-37, and if you go speed plus, that's 40-40 offensively. That's huge. That's absolutely huge. And with merges, that pushes to 44-44. That's absolutely disgusting, and that's the kind of thing that Eliwood can do. With very little support, he hits 50 speed, which means that a seal slot can be open for something like Attack Def Solo, if that ever becomes a thing, or Attack Caress Solo when that becomes a thing. There's a lot of option that he's got. But yeah, I think that is all I had to say about these ones. As for Legion, I've already covered them in depth in the Refined Tier List update. If you want to know the sets that I went over, please watch that video. It basically got everything you need to know on that aspect. Legion got a massive buff with that weapon. In case you didn't know, the tier he was in before was B tier. Yeah, he went from B tier to S-. It's weird how that works, huh? Having a good prep does wonders for a unit. So yeah, that's kind of where he is. Legion got such a huge buff. Honestly, it's kind of insane. Though I will say, like, he is on the same level as Linus. Linus is one of the best AoE buster. His stat line is really good, and now that he can have IVs, it's just even more... Everything I just said is just amplified to some extent. So yeah. If anything, another winner in this batch would be Conrad, as now you can go speed plus on him, which makes him much more consistent with the speed sets, and can make him a lot less awkward to work with in certain ones of his sets, which... yeah, again, is very useful for him. But yeah, that's about all I have to say about this. This will be my final tier list update for GHB Tempest Trial units. I will still be updating the tier list, obviously. It's just, obviously, I can't really do those videos while I'm being in class and teaching and everything. I like to be able to sleep more than 2 hours a night, thanks. But yeah. Other than that, that's basically it. So, yeah. In conclusion, we got a huge buff of flyers, basically, and Jorge is absolutely amazing. As for the other two, well, Eremiya is such a disappointing case, but that's just kind of how it is. I now have down to 3 videos to cover. I have the Sacred Seal tier list update, I have the Legendary tier list update, or really the next Legendary banners, because I still have characters I want to cover on that banner. Mostly the characters that I've not covered in the video before that are on the tier list, and where the placement falls into and why they fall where they are. Obviously, for these types of units, I'm going to force myself to do the next Legendary banner, and then after that, it's going to probably be my last video, unless the Secret Seals are not out by then. Keep in mind, the Legendary tier list update probably will not come out in time for the banner to be done or not. So if you want my opinion on the character, just join my Discord. It's going to be in the description below, obviously, and just ask me there, because it's just very hard for me to find the time when I'm going to be back at school for such a thing. It's going to be extremely difficult, but you know, I'm gonna do my best. If the video is late, the video is late. Nothing I can really do to change that. And if that's the case, well, I'm sorry. That's kind of just how it is. But yeah, I believe I've said my piece with everything I wanted to say in this video. Hopefully this was entertaining and enlightening. And I'm gonna see you all later. Have a nice rest of the day, guys. See ya.